absent of skin tone diversity. And so what the students were asking for was a real problem, because what was happening is that they weren't seeing the diversity, yet the supplemental works were not part of the program. So what I did was we created a LibGuide. We've educated faculty. We told students we're in the process of integration, but I think it really brings to light that some of the works that we're using does not have this diversification, this representation. It's not mainstream in our works. And so when I was in the vendor exhibit, I asked one of the publishers, I said, how do I approach you as a publisher to make sure that you have diversification in imagery, that you have diversification in your authorships, and that I know that this is important? Like, how do I communicate this to you? Because, you know, in the past, if it was a Doody work, I just assume Doody core title that this has all been vetted. But now it's not representation. It's not doing what it needs to, it's not doing what it needs to do. And the students are noticing, our learners are noticing. And, the publisher did address it and said, we have a committee. We are looking at these things. We are making sure that we are employing people who represent diversity, and we are making sure that we are addressing this. So I think it's something to watch. It's a great article to read. I think you should definitely look at it. I know for myself in my own training, I am now thinking about the books that I'm buying and making sure, does it really represent who we are as a global world? And what do the chapter authors look like? So I really encourage you to read that article. The next one is kind of like a real fun title: Homeschooling for Quarantined Residents. So I found this one. I forgot how I found this one, but I just want to call your attention. If you ever have purchased or seen the Rosen's Emergency Medicine, which is a 2-volume set, or the Rogers and Hedges Clinical Procedures in Emergency Medicine, which is a 1,500-page book, I've always wondered, who reads those? Well, apparently, when you're in quarantine and you're a resident and you are a patient of interest, or you have been displaced in your PGY1 residency program, then you might be assigned to do readings. And so I thought it was really neat that this residency program had taken your traditional textbooks and turned them into educational activities. And they used Zoom. It was an 8-week program. They had very positive reporting to do, and they supplemented their residents' education using these 2 core professional textbooks. I just think it was a great way of using the library's collection to kind of just go over and do the clinical training. And so I wanted to share that with you because I think often we don't think about those big books anymore because they're in our databases and we look at them as lookup tools, but they're great for synchronous and continuous education, and they help to fill knowledge gaps. And I think that was a really great use of the work. So I wanted to just tell you about that paper really quickly. And I think that's a great use there. I want to also talk about with you anatomy textbooks. I don't know about you, but I don't know what to do with our anatomy. My library is completely digital. I have 1 shelf of books and half of them are filled with anatomy textbooks. And I don't know what to do with them because they're beautiful textbooks that people keep donating to us and the students don't use them. And our graduate, our professional medical residents, they don't use them. And so this is a big dilemma. What do you do? So in this study that I looked at, because I've been fighting with myself because I've always learned preserve the anatomy textbooks. I've I am an archivist at heart sometimes. And so I looked at this one study and about what are students doing in graduate anatomy. And unfortunately, students are not using the anatomy textbooks anymore. And when my medical school opened with its first class, we used anatomy textbooks and the students didn't use them. And then throughout the program, a little feedback. Throughout the program, our anatomy instructors had been telling me that the students more and more were using websites, to the point where we give them a list of websites and we just say, go at it, pick the one that you like the best. If you want to do this one or that one, we just give them a list and we tell them how much it is, get your own subscription. So we don't tell them they have to use one over the other. So I think this study really kind of hits home. I always joke, the day I find the perfect anatomy website is probably the day I'm going to retire, because I have never been able to hit the nail on this one. I know a lot of publishers and have really come out with some really very spiffy websites. And we had my library in school does not have the Animage table, but really, there's just a lot to be said. Now, I'm not saying for everybody to pitch the textbooks for anatomy. Across the street from me is our community college in town, and there is definitely a use and purpose for those books. And so, and I definitely have seen the nursing students use, and I've talked to that librarian, and they do circulate. I'm just wondering, what are we going to do with them in graduate medical education? So I think that who you are as a student and a learner and how you use these materials really depends. And so I think it's a really great study to show that our learners aren't always using these traditional materials. And with that, I'm going to just quickly move on to OER, and I am going to quickly move on to nursing informatics. Right here, this paper really talks about just cutting edge and things just moving really quickly, that books just don't work anymore and they've moved to OER. I think that's very true, and many of the trends that are going on in our field, especially in informatics. I think there is a way in OER to work with publishers and work with other educational sources to make this all work, and to make the dissemination of peer-reviewed content for us in the biomedical sciences work out. It's a great article, especially if you're working in informatics. I encourage you to read that. Sorry if I'm going a little bit fast because I want to leave time for everybody else. And then the last, this is a really super feel-good article. It's in Medical Reference Services Quarterly. With Matthew Richmond, and he's not here. I checked. I hope he was here. This is another really great program that Rutgers did at their library. Provided a $1,000 incentive award for faculty to kind of move away from students buying just to the traditional textbooks and just kind of go with OER, library licensed materials, and just either a combination course reserve. And it was really successful. And what I really liked about the article is they did interventional radiology. And if any of you have ever worked with the IR physicians, it does, as soon as the book comes out, they'll tell you it's outdated. And the IR radiologist I deal with, they always tell me it's outdated, it's outdated. And so they did something like this, and it was really worked out great. They did it for peds emergency medicine. I've shared this article with our pediatricians. They actually thought it was great. And we're looking for some gamification for some board prep material. So all positive things. Thank you for letting me share. I'm going to move it on to Ramuna.
Hi, all. For those of you who have been to our lively lunches before, one little thing that I like to do, and hopefully some of you appreciate it, is I keep track through the year of various trends and developments that might be noteworthy as we gather in Charleston this year for the 21st time. And my handout is available in Pathable. I hope to do a little more tweaking. I think I found a dead link in there, but basically what I saw were big deals to little deals, new platforms, new publishers. What else is new in our collections world? And things we're seeing at Charleston, open access and transformative agreements, and some anniversaries of products and publishers. Also, the COVID world still continues its ripple effects and preprints. So I invite you all to take a visit with me through those. For those who have an interest, we'll be writing up this session for the Charleston Conference proceedings, which will be in the Michigan Repository, but I linked to that. And I hope that, and some awards, including one that one of our presenters today is already working on version 2, but we did a collection development best practices document in the Medical Library Association Collections Caucus, but it's openly available for new and beginning health sciences librarians. So that's one of our initiatives where it hopefully opens up beyond just Medical Library Association. And 2 other MLA initiatives are going to be described by our next speaker, Rena Lupper from Medical University of South Carolina. So take a look at my trends handout if you have an interest or want to go down memory lane. And we'll mention it again in the proceedings of this session. And I thank you for joining us virtually, and for those of you who are on site. There's so much going on in our world, and we're all kind of going on different edges of this collections world in which we are trying to navigate. So Rena, take it away.
Hi, oh gosh, I got to fix this because I'm so short. Okay, and
Looks good.
okay, thank you. Yeah, my name is Rena Lamke, and I'm actually local. I live here in Charleston. I work at the Medical University of South Carolina, and I welcome you all to Charleston. I'm so happy you're here. And I'm not going to take too much time, but I forgot to put my email address here, but my email address is somewhere, right? Yeah. So do please feel comfortable to contact me if you have any questions. And I am going to talk briefly about these 2 posters that we presented at the MLA 2020 virtual conference. These are 2 initiatives of the education domain. So I don't know how much you know about MLA, the Medical Library Association, but we have these communities and we have domain hubs, which and caucuses, and every caucus, is attached to the domain. So the education domain has different representatives, and we got together to we want to have a repository of educational materials that librarians have created. So anything from slides, that you use for teaching, posters, whatever you have, to put it in here so that it's a repository that's comprehensive and widely open to any librarians out there, regardless of their membership to the Medical Library Association. And so that's the poster. You can actually look at it. We started this initiative in 2019. It took a lot for us to come up with all the policies, what are we really gonna collect? How are we gonna sift through to see what's useful, and then how is this going to be updated? Because it's no use just having a repository of stuff that's outdated that nobody can actually use. And sincerely, the reason why I'm presenting it in here, I wanted I want people to know, even if you're not a medical librarian, and I see some people who are not medical librarians, to actually deposit some of your teaching materials in this repository when it becomes available. Now, the second initiative is the ACRL information literacy concepts, the frames. And I know some people know about them, other people don't, but there are these frames that we're trying to map different professions, into these concepts so that we can actually measure to see if, students or faculty, if they're becoming, information literate. And so different groups have actually mapped these concepts to their competencies. And one good example is the Dental Caucus of the Medical Library Association, and I belong to that. And we started this work again a long time ago, and we finally mapped the competencies of the dental competencies into the information literacy frames. And a bunch of librarians from Canada and the US got together to do this mapping project, and it was really extensive. We actually published it, we wrote about how we did everything and published it, so you can actually access that. And I can send you, the link to that as well. And trying to not take up too much time. So yeah, you can look at both these, posters that we have over here. I do like to talk, so I have to control myself. But the repositories, like I said, we wanted them to be widely, available to anybody. But we got, we run into challenges with the MLA website. First of all, the MLA website is being redesigned. And so we would have to wait a long time to put it there. And then because of the redesign and, all the other things going on at MLA, the staff over there are also very, very busy. And we wanted it to be really flexible so that, people wouldn't have problems, depositing their materials and stuff. And, the accessibility is really, really important. And so we couldn't do that with the MLA website. So now, what we're trying to do, our solution is to get an independent repository. That's, nobody has to log into the site, because like with the MLA site, you have to be a member of MLA and, log into it to get access to it. That's what we're doing. So we actually wrote a proposal for this, repository to be independent, and that's what we're trying to do. And with that, we're gonna have to hire a webmaster and a designer for the website, and then do the database, and set up the timeline of activities. So the committee is gonna continue, because to have the updates and everything, we want to have really good policies for maintenance of the repository. And that's the end of my presentation. Now I'm going to hand it over to Tim. Oh, and Tim is online, right?
Yes. Thanks, Rena. Much appreciated. I hope everyone can hear me. Let me know if we're running into those issues.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Thank you. Hopefully you could see me too. Thank you for having me, and I'm honored to be a part of this Lively Lunch, and thank you especially to Rittenhouse for sponsoring the conference as well as supporting this Lively Lunch. Today, I'm going to be discussing the health sciences ebook landscape largely through the lens of availability, and who's ever on site, we can go forward a slide if you don't mind. Thanks, Liz. Most of my comments today stem from an article that Ramona and I published in the latest issue of Against the Grain that compared health sciences ebook availability in 2021 to data from 2002. That's linked on the screen, and I believe that will be made available on the Pathable site. The 2002 study used the Brandon Hill lists as a sample set for determining health sciences book availability. And this was a study conducted by Ramona and Linda Walton. And they looked at 8 ebook licensing platforms and aggregators to find out which of the Brandon Hill titles were available on these platforms, and found that across all 8, only 19% of the Brandon Hill titles were available in licensable digital formats. For the current study in 2021, Ramona and I used data from Doody's core titles to assess of the same availability. Doody's core titles, for those who may not be aware, is the annually published list of the most distinguished titles in the health sciences, which succeeded the Brandon Hill lists in 2004. We examined ebook availability across 36 licensing platforms from 17 different aggregators and determined that 82% of the core titles were available in licensable digital formats. Between the two studies, continuity did exist in that 6 of the 8 aggregators from the 2002 study were part of the 2021 data set. So of course, the outcome that we found was somewhat predictable in that ebooks of health sciences titles are more readily available in digital formats today than they were back in 2002. And substantially so, by a factor of almost 4. You can see the top graph on the slide indicates how much the availability has grown. And this likely just puts numbers to something that health sciences librarians have known anecdotally for quite some time. So we took a look at what might contribute to that. And what we found was that in addition to a greater demand for and publication of ebooks by publishers, there are simply more players in the game today than there were in 2002. Commercial publishers like McGraw-Hill have multiple licensing platforms. Society publishers also have jumped into the ebook licensing game with, for example, American Academy of Pediatrics, American Psychiatric Association, as well as university presses like Oxford University Press. We also observed that whereas most of the primary ebook licensing options in 2002 stemmed from publisher-specific platforms, in 2021, third-party aggregators really provide the most abundant access to health sciences core title ebooks. And you can see that in the bottom graph where ProQuest and EBSCO provide a really large percentage of the core titles. Rittenhouse's R2 library provides over 20% of the core titles via ebook, and Ovid is just under 20%. In this study, limitations did exist. The data used for Doody's core titles were derived from an opt-in program. So some aggregators may not participate, and some data may have been incomplete or outdated. However, we think it's fair to say that the growth in availability still stands. So availability challenges do exist. And if I could, thank you, Liz. At the time of the analysis, 18% of the core titles were not available via popular ebook licensing platforms or aggregators. This is a notable improvement from 2002, but this still represents 399 titles from 76 different publishers that may prove vital to developing a well-rounded collection for libraries. These books may simply not be available as ebooks, which is uncommon, but it may be more likely that they are just not part of the popular licensing platforms considered in this study. They also may not be part of systems that are traditionally licensed by libraries, things like learning management platforms or clinical health information systems. And so this really presents an opportunity for content aggregators to expand their portfolios by working with more publishers and vice versa. Other challenges exist as well, such as the rising costs and variations of licensing models. I think simply the number of acquisitions models and licensing options proves to be challenging. And curriculum-related ebooks are increasingly offered via individual subscription. So libraries are tasked with making the decision of whether or not to license copies or leave that up to the individual students. And then, of course, we have to talk about the various pain points that the variety of platforms and integrations cause for both end users and librarians. We also took a look at some trends. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, and this was the next slide, please. During the COVID-19 pandemic, libraries were pushed to ramp up their digital efforts. Publishers aided their efforts by expanding access to free trials. Yet some libraries may have ended up paying a second time for digital access to books that they had acquired in print. Differently, advances in social justice and diversity related initiatives led to more ebook collections coming out in those areas. And some information providers also began developing topic-specific book lists to aid in collection development efforts. Doody Enterprises is one of those groups. And of course, recent events don't exist in a vacuum. So focusing focusing on digital during the pandemic and this renewed emphasis of ebooks helps ongoing efforts toward greater ebook enhancements and pushes toward open access, pushes toward open educational resources like Liz was speaking about earlier, as well as consortial ebook initiatives that aim to share ebooks across libraries. And then, of course, Doody Enterprises also does not exist in a vacuum. We will need to continue, much like our partners in the publishing landscape have, to adapt to the ever-shifting environment. And so while recent events have encouraged rapid evolution of curating and making accessible digital resources, the long-term effects of these past few years have yet to be seen. So thank you. And with that, I'd like to pass it on to Lindsay Barnett and Andrea McClellan.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you to the Charleston Conference and Rittenhouse for having us here today. I will be speaking on a research project entitled An Analysis of Publisher DEI Policies. And this is authored by myself, and I'm a librarian at the Yale Medical School, and Andrea McClellan from McMaster University. And even though I am the one speaking today, I really have to shout out my amazing colleague, Andrea. She has been the brains and the driving force behind this project. Our research aims to determine how publishers, electronic resource providers, grant funding bodies, and other players in the scholarly publishing ecosystem are incorporating the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion, collectively known as DEI, into their policies and business models, and how might prioritization of these values improve the author experience and promote diversity in scholarship. We were inspired to start this work in response to the events of the past year, which highlighted systemic racism and inequality in North America and around the world, in hopes that this work can be a launching point for greater engagement in social justice within both medical library communities and library communities in general. To do this, we evaluated a number of major health sciences publishers, including Elsevier, Science Direct, Wiley, Taylor and Francis, Wolters Kluwer, and others. In addition, we reviewed major grant funding bodies such as NIH. This was a manual process, visiting each organization's website and using keyword searching for terms related to DEI. This included searching through a publisher's main site, as well as less formal sources of information, such as blog posts and editorials. We reviewed major publisher imprints as well, such as LWW and Cell Press. We also assessed mission statements and policies to determine whether DEI was explicitly stated as part of a publisher or funder's mission. We found that adoption of DEI elements, and in fact, any mention of DEI at all, was extremely varied, and there was very little consistency among the organizations reviewed. And I should note that we did our first scan in May of 2021, so I'm now presenting the results from that first scan, and shortly I'll give an update when we did a second scan in October 2021. In our first scan, we found that most publishers made broad statements about DEI, but those are usually not featured prominently on the publisher's homepage. Sometimes a web search was needed to locate the content within the website. A broad range of DEI issues are frequently discussed in publisher blogs or editorial postings. Author submission forms often capture gender information, but we did not encounter any that captured other DEI elements. We also found that publishers have embraced efforts around gender in low to middle income countries that align with UN sustainability goals. However, this work is not fully representative of DEI principles and does not address issues of systemic inequality and barriers to access within wealthier nations. We also noted that DEI statistics are difficult to obtain for editorial boards and peer reviewers. If this data is gathered and monitored by publishers, it is not available from the publishers' websites. We also found some positive initiatives that we wanted to note. The Royal Society of Chemistry created a joint commitment for action on inclusion and diversity in publishing, which sets clear goals to increase diversity and equity in academic publishing. And initially, 37 publishing organizations had signed on to this effort. The Coalition for Diversity and Inclusion in Scholarly Communication, or C4DISC, created a joint statement of principles around DEI that many publishers have opted into as well. We would like to see these commitments more prominently displayed on publisher websites, along with actionable goals on how they intend to prioritize DEI in their workflows. We found one publisher had a name change policy for publications, which addresses inequalities experienced by transgender persons, women, or other individuals who may change their name for religious reasons. Another publisher created an inclusion and diversity statement form as part of the submission process, which gathers data and creates a standardized statement, much like a declaration of interest for an article publication. The NIH, which is the top grant funder in North America, has a diversity statement that is customized to the US environment and includes underrepresented populations in the US biomedical, clinical, behavioral, and social sciences research enterprise. NIH policy compliance requires that funding recipients submit diversity report from the research team and for their research if it includes human subjects. This data is monitored and reported on by NIH. However, it is unclear if there are penalties for teams or research studies that consistently demonstrate a lack of diversity or inclusion. Next slide, please. We did find some progress as well in our second scan, which took place last month. We saw that there were some updated website statements, expanded definitions, and more strategic plans. So we are seeing some of the action that we had hoped for in our initial report. There is a focus on diversifying peer review and peer reviewers and opening that up to other researchers. We found that some publishers are offering awards that celebrate diverse authors. We're also seeing more signatories to industry-wide DEI efforts. And some positive initiatives of note that we wanted to call out by name is that Springer Nature and Cell Press are offering some of the best developed plans. So we do recommend that everyone go check out the work that they're doing. However, we're also still seeing some publishers lagging behind. We're still seeing some outdated concepts. So there is movement, but it is very uneven across the publishing industry. We recommend that the scholarly communication industry continue to build on existing initiatives, such as those created by RSC and C4DISC, and do more than just sign on to these statements, but actively adopt the principles and apply more resources to building a more diverse and equitable academic publishing system that provides more opportunities for authors from underrepresented populations. Strong DEI policy should be created for conferences and publications, particularly for research content involving human subjects, such as DNA and tissue. Inclusion and diversity statements should be included in the publishing process to provide authors the option to include a statement in their publication. And statistics on the composition of editorial boards and peer reviewers should be captured and made available to customers so that DEI concerns in the publication pathway are more transparent. And as we continue this research, we really want to hear from our colleagues and understand what other librarians are seeing and what they're doing. So to that goal, Andrea has developed some survey questions that we would like to ask the group. But in the spirit of time, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Karen, and we'll save that for the question and answer portion. Thank you, and please take it over, Karen.
Hey, thanks, Lindsay. So my name is Karen Gao, and I'm at Virginia Commonwealth University Libraries. I'll be talking next about a project we started at our Health Sciences Library to try to surface current titles and have EDI content in them. Next slide, please. So earlier this year, I learned about how public libraries and some academic libraries were conducting diversity audits of their collections, which traditionally is where you take a look at your entire collection or a piece of it and then evaluate how diverse it truly is. And so this got me thinking about our library's needs, which I realized were a little bit different. Even though it'd be interesting to see how well our collection as a whole addresses EDI, I realized that what really mattered for us was making sure that people know about our recently published EDI titles, since clinicians need current information and should probably not be relying on texts about cultural competence from decades ago. But it can be a challenge to gather EDI titles on various topics from our library website. So in the spring, I got together with our liaison librarians to talk to them about whether they might be interested in a spreadsheet that highlights current EDI books and films that we have. And I really just wanted to see if they might be interested in this kind of idea. I didn't want to do any of the work if they weren't interested, or if they maybe had a better idea. They thought it was worth a try. So we brainstormed how we wanted to define EDI, and then we identified different disciplines to categorize the resources into. Then over the summer, a staff member and a student added resources to a spreadsheet of items that were purchased through our firm orders and approval plan, plus a few subscription packages. But I also realized that, just having a really big spreadsheet isn't very useful. It needs to be easy to use as well. So next slide, please. And you can go ahead and play the video. Okay, so I put together a spreadsheet that can be easily filtered by discipline. Ooh, is the video not working? Maybe, is it on the next slide?
Well, there it is. It's moving now.
Oh, okay, good.
I'm sorry.
So that's okay. So what you see me doing there, or was doing there, is selecting the discipline, which was biomedical sciences, and then I picked, whether or not I wanted an ebook, book, or film, and so I picked film. And the film that it pulled up was Picture a Scientist, which we don't permanently own, but we do have access to through a subscription. And then if you read the notes, you can see that this film is about discrimination in STEM professions, which isn't necessarily obvious from the title. So the notes are really key here because we looked at chapter names and book descriptions to determine whether something belonged on this list. We were able to pick up more information than you might just see from the title or the catalog record, and then we put that information into the notes. Moving forward, most of the items in this spreadsheet are getting added as I select them for our collection. In a process, it's like a book order audit, since I usually look at chapter contents and descriptions as part of my selection process. So it makes sense to add titles to this spreadsheet as part of my general selection workflow moving forward. I'd kind of just, we just did the summer project to get started. Next slide, please. So a very key element of this project is that liaisons can edit the spreadsheet as well. So they can add their own titles, add notes if there's a maybe noteworthy chapter in the title that we didn't catch initially, and they can also recategorize the disciplines if they want to. So for instance, if our nursing liaison sees a title that isn't strictly nursing, but he wants it to pull up with the nursing books, he can pick nursing, he can check off nursing, and then he can also add some notes about why he thinks nurses might be interested in it. And then if the liaisons think it's appropriate, they're also free to share this spreadsheet with faculty or anyone else that's part of the VCU community. Next slide, please. So in theory, this spreadsheet will make it easier for liaisons and interested faculty to track down current EDI content in comparison to using our library website, which is, I think, good news for them. And because I've worked with our liaison librarians on this project, I know that I have some buy-in and it should be more useful than if I had just gotten started on this on my own. Another useful byproduct of this spreadsheet is that it does serve as our diversity audit of sorts, since from this list I can see what I've been buying recently and which areas we need more content in, although whether anything's been published in the areas I have gaps in is really a separate question. What also remains to be seen is whether this spreadsheet is something our librarians and faculty will actually use. So we are going to reassess this project in a few years to see if it's worth continuing or if we need to make changes to it. The spreadsheet audience is also limited to the liaison librarians and faculty that they share it with. I'm talking with our catalogers right now to brainstorm options available for incorporating this into our library website. But I'm actually not really sure that this option will work, since it will inhibit the flexibility and collaborative nature of the spreadsheet. So we'll see if that goes anywhere. Anyway, this is our library's experiment to try to surface our current EDI content and understand what we have. And I would love to hear from you if you have any thoughts or ideas to share. I'm going to pass the floor now on to Ramona.
So we're done with our very rapid run through of our presentations. Anyone in the house have any comments or questions for our speakers or generally on the topics we covered today? Looking around, everyone's quiet, munching. There is a comment, okay?
Hi, I'm Mary Butner at Lane Medical Library, and we're using complete anatomy for our anatomy teaching. And the students like it and the faculty have incorporated it. It includes three-dimensional product, and it actually works like an app. So, yeah, I don't know, does anyone else have it?
So
Anyone else have complete anatomy?
someone is sharing that they use Complete Anatomy at Stanford and that the students like it, and it also has an app and has 3-dimensional
And it allows the faculty to incorporate it into course.
course incorporation is possible. So that's one product that some folks are using. Anatomy is a rough one. Some of our faculty at Northwestern actually retired. They didn't really like the way the curriculum, they were getting less and less space in the curriculum, but maybe it's because they didn't want to adapt these new tools. I don't know.
And then in terms of skin of color, you all probably know Visual DX.
Visual DX has
They've
gone great
made
strides
yeah.
with the skin of color initiatives and creating content that would cover that area for sure. Any other follow-ups on Nicole? Has anybody commented on anything in chat that we should hear about?
Yes, absolutely. There's a few questions in chat. There's a question here for Liz. Liz, you mentioned an effort to condense clinical sciences and that the textbooks are behind. Can you describe resources that you need to support this effort?
Could you recap again, please?
Sure, absolutely. You mentioned that you are looking to condense your clinical sciences and that textbooks are behind. And there's a question about what types of resources you need to support that effort.
I'm not saying the textbooks are behind, it's that the curriculum is constantly changing. And so we are pulling the textbooks apart. And so, and which can be done because they're ebooks, but the content and the way we teach is constantly changing. For example, we are constantly adding content to the curriculum and taking it out. And that article that I cited from from Academic Medicine points that out. So there's a portion that I skipped over. But if you look, health systems management, health systems science has been added to the curriculum. You might notice that you have less time sometimes for EBM. You might notice that you're seeing more with less time in preclinical because we're going to pass-fail in USMLE. And more integration with preclinical and clinical. The clinical experience is starting as soon as they start medical school. So you're seeing a lot of changes, rapid changes. With your curriculum committees, they tinker. I mean, I have 4 classes of medical students, and they have had 4 different experiences because they're always tinkering with the program. And, with LCME coming by between, depending on what your schedule is, depending on your medical school, and depending on what your deficiencies are at your medical school. Mind you that there's 159 medical schools that do it slightly different. There's, no one textbook fits it all. So we're seeing just a lot of reasons to look at OER, look at using textbooks as supplements, looking at the primary literature as well. And you have to remember, your preclinical students cannot read primary literature. They do not have enough training. So we need the secondary literature. Textbooks are still very important, But on the other hand, you have medical students that come with a non-science background, enough science to get them into medical school, and you got ones coming with a master's degree in biomedical sciences. So you got a big spectrum. And so you do need a wide berth of textbooks because some have to remediate, some need to catch up, and other ones are like ready sprinting when they start medical school. So I'm not saying that they're behind, but we have a wide breadth. And then again, the program. And, what's in fashion, what's in vogue. Right now, health system science is in vogue right now. It definitely has cut me out of the program for EVM a little bit. I've been sliced and diced a little. I'm now in the clinical sciences where there's time, not so much in 1 and 2. Okay, what are you gonna do?
Thank you.
There was a session at this conference on OER audits. And that was an idea I thought of as our speaker talked about DEI audits. So that was kind of interesting. We'll hold off on the on-site question. And you had something else,
Sure.
Nicole?
Sure, yes, we have a question here following on OER. Have OER submissions begun to be accepted by MLA, referring to your handout? I know the poster graphic slide said they anticipated to start accepting them in 2021. Or maybe that was Raina.
MLA submitting submission.
Is this a question about the repository, submissions for educational materials into the repository?
Yes, OER.
Okay, yeah, no, we haven't started because we don't have anywhere to house, the materials, and we just turned in our proposal to MLA because MLA is going to finance our web, the web, website that we are talking about. But we did have a test group of people to try and submit articles, and slides to when we were still thinking about having the repository on the MLA website. And that was so cumbersome, everybody complained about it. But we'll be looking for another test group once we get the new website. So be on the lookout for that.
And the downside, a lot of us have institutional repositories, but when you do it at one institution and say that project manager moves on or something, so some collaborative approach at the MLA level. Okay, Mary, did you have
I
something?
just had a question about finding interventional radiology.
Oh, interventional radiology thread continues.
So I had an M4 student who made his own podcast.
So at Western Michigan, a student helps out to fill the gap in interventional radiology. He made a podcast, so there you go.
In Vermont and Hampshire, and he has continued. He has a following. And
So he continues the work and he has a following. So that, there you go.
But there's a great book that came out in Springer like 2 or 3 years ago. But they just make their own material. So,
There you go. You need an audit. That's what some of the non-medical, the libraries, they're looking at reading lists, and if they don't see any assigned reading books, they're reaching out to the faculty only to find out that they are actually using OER in their curriculum, but the library never knew about it. So they're putting them in their audit, their inventory. Nicole, are we done with the virtual questions?
Nope, I have a few more questions here. I have one for Tim, if Tim wants to come up to the hot seat.
I'm here.
Hey, Tim, did you look at what was available only via publisher-specific platforms, or did you look at publisher-specific platforms and aggregators as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we looked at both. We looked at publisher-specific platforms as well as aggregators. We pulled from the participants in Doody's core titles ebook discoverability program, and both groups participate in that group. So I think in total there were 36 different platforms that we looked at across 17 aggregators, and those 17 include both publisher-specific and those third-party aggregators like I was talking about.
The article is in the September issue of Against the Grain that you can find in the Charleston Hub, and it was a whole series on ebooks, and we threw our hats in the ring to write one on ebooks in the health sciences. And I do have to admit, unlike our undergrad compadres, we did kind of lump together textbooks and other kinds of online books for the purposes of our study. Nicole, what else do we have? Are we almost done with the virtual?
Yep, we are almost
Okay.
done.
Okay.
One more for Tim, with regards to the missing content, about 300 resources that weren't available anywhere. Was it primarily from smaller scholarly publishers and associations, or were they also from commercial publishers?
It was largely the former.
Okay.
We didn't take a deep dive into assessing which publishers there were, but I can say anecdotally from looking at those data that it was smaller scholarly publishers, university presses, smaller groups like that.
Yeah, it was an interesting study. Anybody on site have anything to share? We have a quiet group. They are here. They're watching.
Is anyone looking at boards and beyond?
Boards and Beyond is a product, which is a popular thing at our lively lunches. We drill into specific publishers, and we're not afraid. We ask about specific products, and everyone's shaking their heads. No one's familiar with Boards and Beyond.
I just got a trial for our faculty. I think we're at the exploratory phase, not the official trial phase yet.
I don't know if any of you attended the virtual walk through the vendor showcase. Some of us who are on site discovered there's a product using virtual reality to teach empathy to nursing students and others. And I just thought that was fascinating. I wish I'd known about it to put it in my handout. Maybe I will as an addendum. I can edit it, and it's in my repository. I can put a new version in. So there's a lot of new tools. A couple of years ago, there was the article in JMLA that they were finding that we are being asked to collect, and we've discussed it at previous lunches. We're being asked to collect and license and maybe sometimes partner, because sometimes our budgets aren't going to be the ones to pay for some of these things. We were asked about Spanish medical language learning systems, and others have been asked, for medical illustration tools, things that kind of are on the periphery of what libraries usually collect. Rena's got something to add.
Sort of related, but I'm just curious. I have like some seasoned faculty. They have been using these anatomy resources for ages, and now because Flash is no longer supported, so they can't get access to that. And I've had like two of them, and we have complete anatomy and anatomy TV and all that stuff. But two of them like asking me how I can get them access to those things that require Flash. Do you ever have things like that in your workplaces, people wanting to use the same things that they have used over and over again and not wanting to use the new things that just curious.
Yeah. So some retire, like at my institution, and others are resistant. Now we need a whole new generation of anatomy educators. So we're running up against our last moments of this year's Health Sciences Lively Lunch. I always enjoy. It was a bit of an interesting challenge putting together hybrid. So I really appreciate Lindsay, Andrea, who was quiet, but she was listening to how Lindsay presented their poster. So MLA was a great idea generator for this year's session. Some of the posters, I think, don't always get wider audiences. So I think we tried to reveal some of the work some of us are doing. So let's look for the new collection development best practices version 2.0. 1.0 won an award in MLA, so that was fun. Looking at what NLM's going to be doing with preprint trials and all their other new initiatives. And I thank Rittenhouse for their sponsorship. That one update session, I heard they're doing some developments behind the scenes, so we might see some innovations there. And hopefully on site, some of us will linger a little bit. And for those of you who are virtual, please send us ideas for next year's Lively Lunch. So thank you very much, everyone, for connecting. Thank you.